Good morning. Today I'm going to do show and tell of water testing equipment in AP Environmental Science. So I'm here on my patio and I apologize for the shadows. It is during quarantine, so I was able to get all of my equipment from the school, but I only had an hour, so I couldn't film the equipment at my classroom lab, but I was able to bring it home, so I'm filming it at home here. So let's start first with the cheap, easy one, and that is temperature. So most of you probably have some thermometers around the lab. You can use plain thermometers for water quality testing. And or you can buy probes. These are the cheapest type of probes. Now, the companies that make them, they call them sensors, not probes. This is a Pasco wireless probe, so this is the newest form of the probeware, and they are wireless, so they hook by Bluetooth. And then this is the competitor vernier. They are both great. I've used both of them. I have both types in my lab, so I train certain groups on different equipment, and so some of my groups will use the Pasco, some will use vernier, and then other various sensors and things that I have around the lab. So one of the things that I do for students is I provide them with a laminated instruction sheet. So let me find the instruction sheet for temperature. So this is the one I provide them for how to use a temperature probe, and the ones that I've had for years and years, for about 15 years, and they still work really well, they're old vernier ones that use a calculator, these old Texas Instrument calculators. And so the students just use these, and I've used these for a lot of other labs as well that I need temperature for. Oh, there's no batteries in here, so that's why it's not turning on. But it reads the temperature on the screen. And so my directions are for these because I've used them for so many years, and I have a whole set. So most of my students use those for temperature, and they've lasted forever. So I show them in the picture. I have a thing of distilled water on each table, and they dip it in the distilled water. They dip it in their water sample. Now this shows eco columns. So my students do eco column water quality data for about 10 weeks in the fall. And so every week they do 3 or 4 main tests, and I'll talk about those first. Then in the spring, we do water samples from around town. So my students will bring in a sample from wherever they are with interesting water. And I will give you the link to the video on how I teach students how to take a water sample and bring it into lab. If you are lucky enough to be able to go out to a water source like a pond or a creek nearby with your students, that is great. I am jealous of you. I do not have that ability, so my students bring in and then we analyze these sources. So if we've had rain, and we do this in February, they'll bring in creek water from the hiking trails. We have a man-made lake in town next to a restaurant. Some kids will get that water. We do have a water reservoir called Castake Lake, so some kids will go up there and get a water sample. Some kids will be at the beach. The beach for us is about an hour away, so they'll get ocean water or marina water and bring it in. So I tell them about 2 weeks ahead of time that if in the next 2 weeks you are by interesting water, bring in a sample. And so a few do, and that's enough to get one sample per group of 4 kids, and usually I have enough that comes in. Not everybody, but maybe 10 kids will bring in some samples. If I don't have enough that come in, kids can do my fish tank water, or they can do tap water or bottled water for water testing. So that's in the lab. Okay, so I provide them these and distilled water for rinsing the probe before and after using it. And the distilled water can last all day. It's just a dipping, rinsing beaker of distilled water. All right, so those are the options for temperature. The next one that's important for water quality testing or for eco columns is pH. So I have several different types of pH meters. Let me find them. And I can't find them. Well, let's talk about dissolved oxygen for right now until I find my pH meters. Okay, so different options for dissolved oxygens right here. So let me back up actually, and let's talk a little bit about the cheaper way to go than probeware. So with water quality testing, not really with eco columns very much, although you could do this with eco columns, but for water quality testing, the cheapest way to go at the beginning of the year, and I'm going to show you this on my iPad. I'm going to show you a picture because I don't have a real one because I don't use them. But I did when I started teaching APES and I didn't have the probeware. So I started with going to Water Quality Lab, and I'm going to click on the inexpensive kit here. This is the cheapest way to do water quality. So it's a Lamont low-cost water quality kit here. And you would need about one per period. So water quality is your biggest chunk of supply money for the year. So it's about $53 per class, and then you have all of the water quality tests. So over time, this is more expensive than probes and sensors, but from year to year, it's cheaper. That's not always the case. So if you're just starting out and you need to get supplies and you don't have grant money or a lot of money to spend on probeware, then this is the best bet to go with. And you get all of your water quality tests here. Now there are more expensive Lamont ones as well that do more, but this is the cheapest option to start with. All right, so let's go back to dissolved oxygen. These are the most expensive probes. Now let's talk about that for a second. In the kits, there are there are dissolved oxygen tests in the kits, but the biggest investment and the most beneficial investment you can make is in a dissolved oxygen probe. At least one to start and more when you can. So I've been teaching this for 15 years and I started with one. And over time, I've written grants when I've seen them or I've put on Donors Choose. And over time, I've built up my supply where I have about 5. So during eco column water testing, 2 groups will share 1. The cheapest workhorse that I've found is this Milwaukee brand. Now it's not going to show anything right now because it's shut off for summer, and here's the probe right here, and it's in a, it needs to be reset after summer vacation. So it doesn't give you an accurate reading right now. It's not in water either. This thing lasts forever with heavy use. It hardly ever needs calibrating. I calibrate it once a year and that's it. And it is the cheapest of the dissolved oxygen meters. And on Amazon, I believe it's about $180. So that is the cheapest. And these are the ones I have the most of because they will last for years. Now I'm on my 2nd round because I've been teaching this for a long time. So the first round of these lasted me about 6 or 7 years, and then I've replaced them over time, but that's with heavy use. Okay, another great option. So if you have some grant money in your school, Des Vernier or Pasco, these are both really great options. They come with this sponge in here to keep them moist when you're not using them. And so let me just show you what the tip looks like here. Okay, and then the Pasco is very similar, but the Pasco is a little bit different because you can, it's waterproof. So if you are out at a stream or a creek, you can hang this from the hook and you can dip it into your water supply. Like if you're on a bridge or a pier overlooking the water, you can put it in like that, hanging on a string. This one also has this lid, so it's waterproof, and then you turn it on right here in this on button, and then you charge it right here. So you got to make sure it's charged before you go water quality testing. And then you take off the bottom, and inside is the little sponge to keep it moist when it's not in use. And so this is Pasco. This one also does temperature as well. So it does dissolved oxygen and temperature. So you could save some money on temperature probes with this one. The vernier is also a great one. It is more lightweight. It does not do temperature. And so this one is, the benefit of this one is that you can, if you forget to charge it, so they're charged, but if you forget to charge it, then you can just plug it into your computer and get the reading instead of by Bluetooth. So it can be Bluetooth or it can be by wire. And so they all come with a wire. Here's one of the wires, and so you can plug this part in here and this part in your computer. For some of the Pascos, they don't have that. They're all run on battery. This one, you could do the same with here if you undid this, but some of the Pascos don't have that ability. Okay, so these are the dissolved oxygen meters. So dissolved oxygen, let's talk about eco columns. So if you do not have money yet, do the eco columns anyway. You won't get as great of data. If you have any money, I recommend getting a dissolved oxygen meter because it gives the kids so much information, especially if their fish dies and they see the dissolved oxygen plummet because of decomposition. They make a ton of connections. So again, if you don't have the money for one, don't worry about it. Still do eco columns anyway. If you do have the money, then if you have any sort of money, get at least one or a few because the readings take a little time. Like this takes about a minute, which to kids is forever. All right, let's move on to pH probes. I found some of my pH probes, but not others. So let's talk about pH. So for a lot of years, I used these yellow ones, but I no longer recommend them. They're actually nice and cheap, $10 to $15 on Amazon, but when I first bought these, they lasted pretty well, a year or two, which is pretty good for pH, but now they don't. So I no longer recommend these, unfortunately, and I haven't found that cheap of a replacement. So if you want to go really cheap to start with for pH, I recommend test strips. If you would like a probe that's also inexpensive, Hanna is a company that makes more inexpensive ones, and they're really easy to calibrate and they last a long time. Okay, so Hanna is the brand if you want to get probeware that's not quite as expensive as the sensors. They're a great brand. Okay, the other pH meters that are vernier or Pasco are great as well, and unfortunately I did not bring them home because I have them stored for summer upright in their storage solution, and I did not grab them in my lab before I left the building when I had to leave after an hour. So I don't have the vernier or Pasco to show you, but they are also really good pH sensors as well. Okay, so for eco columns, the three that I recommend, if you have any money and you want to do eco column data about once a week, is your pH, your dissolved oxygen, I just picked one of the three here, and your temperature. And you can get them all the same brand. If you have grant money, you can get them all vernier, you can get them all Pasco, or you can do a variety of different brands, which is normally what I have in my lab. Although I have more vernier now because I won their technology award this year, so I have a lot of vernier, and they are great. So pH, dissolved oxygen, and temperature are the three main ones that you can take data with every week, and you can rotate a set per one class or every 3 groups if you want to, if you have enough money, or build it up over time. My students get really good at data collection, that it only takes 15 minutes once a week to get our data collection, because I teach them how to do it really, really fast, and they can do it. Now, that's not the first time. The first time they do data and they learn how to use the different probeware, it takes them 45 minutes. And then I tell them, actually, I wait until 15 minutes left in the period, and then I say, go take your data, and then they have to be done by the bell. So they can get this done and get all their data done, but they have to split it up. All 4 kids in a group have to do different things. One person's on the computer entering the spreadsheet data. One person's with the ruler measuring plants. Another person's using the water quality probeware. So everybody's doing different tasks, and you can get it done quickly, but you have to train them. Okay. Another thing, if you have some money for eco columns, oh, by the way, those past 3, you also need for water quality testing. Again, you can buy them in a test kit, or over time you can build up your probeware. Okay, so let's talk about nitrates. So nitrate probeware is fickle. And I'll talk about that in a second, but it's great, it's good. The newer ones are much better than the older ones. The test strips are quicker and easier, but they cost money. So this bottle is about $18 per year, and you get 50, but I cut them in half to get 100. So I have my lab assistants, my student service lab assistants, they slice these in half to make 2 out of 1. So normally they're about this big, and my student service slice them so I can get twice as many tests per bottle. So I buy, I have a lot of APES classes, but if you have 100 tests in here and you do them once a week, if you only have 1 APES class, you might only need 1 bottle. For me, I need about 5 bottles because I have 5 APES classes. So this is quick, easy, and cheap-ish to do nitrate nitrates. Now the other companies, the sensors, they are there and they're much improved. So this is a Vernier one, and I still have it in soaking solution for the summer. And you have to be, so this is Vernier nitrate. You have to be prepared to calibrate it in the morning. Now the older ones that I had from 15 years ago, they were fickle and they lost their calibration sometimes in the middle of the period. And that was very challenging, as you know, with students. So this is when I switched to test strips. But last year I got one of these from Vernier to review, and I was much impressed because it kept its calibration all day. So it still needs to be calibrated when you do any kind of water quality testing, and it's been a week or so. And actually, I tested it a week later and it had still held its calibration. So it might last longer than a week for calibration. It might be 2 or 3 weeks for calibration now, which again is a big improvement over the old sensors for nitrates. If you had some extra money and you wanted to get ammonia, that's an really interesting test as well, especially for eco columns, because the fish waste comes out as ammonia, and then through nitrifying bacteria it gets switched to nitrites and then nitrates. So you have to have a robust bacteria population in your eco column water chamber. So the kids might see ammonium higher when you first put the fish in, and then over time the bacteria will become more robust and you might have less ammonia and more nitrates, and it's a really good tangible way for students to see nitrification in eco columns. But again, this is not necessary if you're starting out and you're doing it the cheap way. You don't need to necessarily do nitrates in your eco column chambers. It's really interesting for kids, so if you wanted to just buy a bottle to try it out and do a test every other week or every 3 weeks, you could do that as well. I do not have a Pasco one of these. I don't have one of theirs to show you as well, but I know they make them. All right, let's talk about some more water quality tests. So those are the 4 things the cheapest is temperature. You can start with temperature, and then pH, and then more important is dissolved oxygen. It's not cheap, but it's really important when you can get some probes. And then you can also add these for your water quality testing for ecocoms. For later water quality from a creek, a pond, whatever, you need to do all 4 of those tests, and then you need to add a few more. So here are some other important ones. Let's talk about turbidity. This is what I used for turbidity because it has these Secchi discs. If you go out to a pond or a lake or river or the ocean, if you're that fortunate, there's these large Secchi discs you can make or buy that you lower on a string down into the water. And the depth that it fades out is there's a calculation to measure the turbidity of the water. You can also get these long, huge turbidity tubes. Carolina sells them for streams and things like that. And there's a Secchi tube at the bottom of that big long tube. Because I don't go out to a creek or a river or a pond, when my students bring in water samples, I have this guy. And so they fill up their water sample here, and then they match it and they look down here, and whatever color here is the turbidity, which is in JTUs. And so this is my turbidity column. All right, let's show you what the other options are for turbidity. Now, both companies make these, but I only have a passcode to show you. So in this colorimeter and turbidity, now in chemistry, you can use these. So if your department buys these for chemistry, you can also use them for turbidity. And there's a little, I don't have it with me, but there's a little chamber that fits in here. They fill their water sample, they put it in, and then, oh, by the way, on these Pasco or Vernier, it hooks to an app on the iPad, a phone. My students use Chromebooks. So the app on the Chromebook, so this is the Pasco app, and it will tell them the reading of whatever device is hooked to it through Bluetooth. And then this is, let me show you the, this is the Vernier one called Graphical Analysis, and they're a little bit different in different ways. That each of the apps have different strengths and weaknesses, but we won't get into that right now. Okay, so I know Vernier makes one as well that you can do turbidity with also. All right, let's talk about the next test. That's a good test to do. Let's talk about salinity. So my salinity meter has been a workhorse for a very long time. I had it out. Let's do conductivity actually first, since I have these in my lap. So I have different types of conductivity here. Conductivity, and this is my super old one that has never broken from Vernier for 15 years. This is one that hooks to the calculator again, but it still can be totally used by kids. It has worked for a really long time. Okay, but now they make them as their wireless. So I have the 2 brands here, and I have this old one from Vernier. So conductivity measures whatever is dissolved in the water. So it's a combination of total dissolved solids. So turbidity is suspended solids. Conductivity is dissolved solids, and we can talk with the kids about that, what those things mean. These are all work really, really well. And so it just depends on what brand your school goes with. And it's an important reading, and how we talk with it is this. To run all the water quality tests every day, let's say if you're a water manager for a lake, is expensive and it takes time. But conductivity shows you if something's going on. So if your conductivity reading is the same every day, you know the same amount of salts, minerals, calcium, nitrates, whatever's in the water dissolved is the same. But if you see your conductivity increase, you know something else is there, and then you can do other tests to figure out what else is in the water. So for my students, our conductivity runs really, really high because we have a lot of calcium. We have very hard water in our tap water and in our natural water. So our conductivity readings are always very, very high. All right, that's another good one for when you have money. It's not completely necessary right away. Another good one is to measure hardness. So for a lot of years, I've just bought one bottle of hardness for the one, not for eco-columns, but the day we do these other tests. So for eco-columns, I just do temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, nitrates. When the students bring in water samples for other water quality testing from around town, we do all these other ones. So one of them, what we do is hardness, which we are testing calcium and magnesium in here, and they color match the strips. So the strips look like this, and they color match it. I recently just got a probe for that to try out, and it is the Vernier calcium one. Let's see. I do not have it here, so let's go on to the next item. But they do make calcium probes. Pasco and Vernier have those probes. All right, let's go on to the next one. Another test that I do is a copper test. I do this as my sample heavy metal test. So lead tests are very, very expensive. So I say this is our token heavy metal test that is a lot cheaper than lead tests. And we don't have lead water problems anyway in my town. But if you do, it might be interesting to actually do lead tests. But these are copper strips and you do the color match. And I just get one bottle for the year. And you could also slice these in half if you wanted to double them as well. It's a little bit harder with some of these, but you could do that as well. Okay, so that's my token heavy metal. All right, what else do I do? Oh, I do salinity. So let's talk about salinity. Let me find it in here. Again, I have all of these, which you will have access to, which gives the students instructions on how to do all of the water quality tests. This is for that turbidity probe, turbidity tube that I use in the classroom. So salinity probe is an old one from Vernier, but it still works. And that's nice because especially when my students bring in samples from the ocean. Here's this salinity one that I've used for many, many years with my students, and it still works. So sometimes my students will bring in ocean samples, and it's really interesting because you can definitely see a difference in salinity at different parts of the beach. Our salinity near the coast is lower than the average. So the average is 3.5% salt for oceans in general, but near the coast it's less. And we talk about the fresh water coming in and diluting it. So when my students bring in beach samples, so they go to the beach, they go out in the waves, they get a sample, or even in a marina, it really only measures about 22 parts per thousand, which is about 2.2%, somewhere in there, somewhere in the twos. And so it really brings home the fact that fresh water empties into the ocean and dilutes it, which is a concept that they need to understand with estuaries or coastal areas and things like that. So a salinity probe can be very helpful. One of the things you can talk about too is that sometimes my students bring in their pool, their backyard pool sample, and it registers on the salinity, and we talk about why. It's because of the chloride ion that's from the chlorine in their pool that's registering here, because the salinity probe measures sodium chloride. So the chloride ion in the ocean, it's also measuring that from the pool, but it's not salt. So we can talk about a little bit of chemistry that way and how the probes are made. So salinity is also another great one to have. When you have the opportunity, when you have the money, and again, not all these things you need right away. Okay, so my students in their lab reports, so let's let's not talk about ecocoms. So ecocoms is different. Let's just talk about water quality. So I provide them when they're doing this lab, and it takes about a 55-minute period, and they rotate all of my probes. So I have 9 different tests. They each come in their own basket with their own set of directions. And then they get 4 or 5 minutes per test, and then they pass the basket to the next group. And they can get through all of the water quality tests in a 55-minute period is what I have in my class. They need to, now they may not be able to fill in all of the, they can get their readings, but maybe not all the info. So I give them another day in class to get all the info. And this tells them what they need to know, like what the heck is dissolved oxygen? What does it measure? What is bad for fish? What is bad for humans? Because those are 2 different things. Nitrates. So all of my tests are in here. What is the limits for fish? What's the limits for humans? And what is the test in general? Then they have to go to our local water quality report. So I print these out. So this is a local water quality report, and you can usually find these on the web because legally your water companies have to publish these. And so this is the 2019 water quality report. And I apologize for the smudging. I brought it home from my classroom, and it got water from the sprinklers on it outside. So what I do here is I help them with this with a little bit of highlighting. So I print one of these copies per group, and they don't take it with them, it's just reference. And I highlight, this is the EPA limit, because they don't know what they're looking at. And these are the various different areas that they do the testing when in town. We have kind of a weird water system in town where different water agencies provide different sections of town. It's very strange. It's old. It's because our town wasn't actually a city until 1987. And so you have sometimes these separate entities that began a long time ago. Okay, we were unincorporated county for a long time. And so anyway, long story. So I highlighted for them and I asked them, okay, are any of these levels above EPA limit? Because I want them to see that the water in our town, our tap water, is actually really, really safe compared, well, I mean, some cities it's bad. They hear in the news about Flint, Michigan, and they think tap water is really bad for you. And it's not in most cases. And so families spend a huge amount of money and all the ecological problems with bottled water. And I want them to see evidence that our tap water is a lot of times safer than a lot of brands of bottled water. So I have them analyze these with some questions. And then I give them some reference sheets from some laws. So I give them the websites, but I also have these printed for them as well. So these are the EPA limits, and I want them to choose some more tests because we did 10 tests, and I say, according to these 10 tests, is your water safe? Okay, yes, it might be, but would you drink it? Should you drink it? Not based on 10 tests. So I have them look at all these other tests that the EPA requires that we don't do. And it has to meet EPA standards for all of these tests to be considered safe to drink for our tap water. And so I have them pick a few of them and the EPA limits, etc., so they can see all the things that we measure to talk about safe drinking water. So an important water quality test is coliform bacteria, and there's several ways that you can do it or not. It's really important that kids get exposure to coliform bacteria because it's an essential test. If your water has coliform, fecal coliform bacteria in it, it's really bad. First of all, nothing is safe for it for EPA limits. And in this reference sheets, when you go through total coliforms, right here, this is the EPA limit for total coliforms, including E. coli, 0. A coliform bacteria is from mammal intestines, including ours. So if you have any positive coliform bacteria, it is not safe to drink. So you can do these tests in lab, but they are expensive. So here's one type that you can do called a biopaddle from Lamont. And there are, I believe, 10 tests in here, which actually can be done on both sides. And so one side, there's some agar in here, and then on the other side is some agar. And you can inoculate both sides. So you can get 20 tests out of this package. These are expensive, and some years I skip the fecal coliform because I just don't have enough funds that year. And I actually have this filmed using a kit, a Petri dish kit. So I've done fecal coliform a little bit different each year. Coliscan with little Petri dishes that are pre-filled with special agar that indicates fecal coliform excuse me, is a good choice. These are a good choice. But I've also filmed it. So a lot of years when I don't have quite enough money or quite enough time, I have a video that I will send you where I have the Petri dishes from a special fecal coliform test, and I've inoculated several water samples and then gone back, and we can see the growth in them. So you are welcome to use that if you don't have the funds to purchase. They run between $70 to $100 for just a limited amount of tests. So for my students, I have about 40 to 45 groups every year, which would cost me about $200 just to do fecal coliform tests. So sometimes if I have a kit, I will pick and choose certain groups, and then we analyze the next day everybody's tests that came in. So not everybody does it, or I have them watch the video one. So that is fecal coliform.